Welcome to the Generation AI podcast with me, JC Bonilla, and your awesome host or co-host, Artist Kadoi. And here, we demystify artificial intelligence under the lens context of higher education. Artist, my co-host, how you doing, bud?
Hey, JC. Doing great, man. It's, fall is in full swing. There's just so much happening in the technology world that we had a news episode last week, and this week we have some even more exciting kind of discussion that we're going to talk about. But I'm doing great, and I know that you're back in New York today.
I'm back in New York. I love doing some episodes while I was abroad. I was visiting my family, as you know. Actually, I got to see some of our prior recordings. The video, I think it's on LinkedIn, and the curtains, my mom's curtains made it live. So thank you, Element team, basically the production team, that it's glorifying my mom's curtains. So back in New York, little chill. Kids are back in the routine, and always catching up with stories. And artists, you've been traveling around the US. I see you basically in different places, but this world of AI doesn't continue to surprise us. And you and I have been exchanging messages about the progress that AI has and the pace that it has. But one of the things that you wanted to do is center around this conversation on one of our basically superheroes in terms of production. And it so happens that we see these, humans, Sam Altman, I just heard a wonderful interview from Bill Gates. Of course, we know about Steve Jobs and all these humans, but there's, in a way, an episode dedicated to the one and only Elon Musk. Artists, why is this man such important for us today that we're going to actually dedicate an episode of what is happening at the fingerprints, the output of this human, Elon Musk?
Yeah. So we're gonna separate kind of the accomplishments of kind of what's happening in the world of AI, how kind of this fits into the fast pace of technology and what's happening. But when you see that, you see Elon being at the center, or at least tangentially related with a lot of these advancements that we're doing. So I figured that we can kind of talk a little bit about diving into kind of some of these achievements that are happening from SpaceX to Tesla and XAI, and how Elon is accelerating humanity in kind of this future and faster and faster than ever possible than we were thinking before. So today we're kind of going to talk a little bit about these three major breakthroughs, or at least three major achievements that they're engineering marvels, but then also kind of possibly impossible that somebody would have thought this were possible, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or even 6 months ago, or even today. So we're talking about SpaceX's Starship, which they had their fifth launch and the reusability, and kind of how that's pushing forward towards interplanetary travel, kind of this vision that Elon is pushing for. Tesla's Robotaxis and kind of a humanoid robot, and how they're transforming and reshaping kind of this automation world and where we are. And then last but not least, which I think is one of the more important ones, is XAI, and how they have accelerated and become a major player. And we're going to specifically talk about the record-breaking supercomputer, around 100,000 H100 chips that they developed, which is the largest and fastest AI development infrastructure today. So all three of those, and the main theme here is, kind of putting Elon at the center of a lot of these accomplishments, and his relentless kind of pursuit of these goals, and the idea that we're going to try to, and this, your framework, guys, so you're going to love this. It's this idea of first principles thinking, and like the willingness to take risks, right? So
I'm excited about the conversation. And for all you listeners who, like me, when basically get approached by an awesome human, like, artist is this, I want to do an episode on Elon and what he has accomplished. And then my eyes go like, what? Say that, like Elon? Because, there's a really interesting polarity in opinions on the man, right? And we don't want to talk about that. This is not a political episode. We know where he's at. And that's basically not conversation today, whether for us liberals, Democrats, that's like a big no. But for the point of this conversation, what I want to say is that it's undeniable that the accomplishments in terms of engineering breakthroughs, and number two, how this is AI adjacent, it's worthy of a conversation. Whether it's Elon, Steve Jobs, of JC Bonilla, it's not that it matters, but as you mentioned, is the outputting how this approach of first principles, but kind of in a way permeates the consistency of these type of breakthroughs, because that's the beautiful thing. So you can kind of kick us into first gear, that this is not a one-off of these human. Elon Musk just continues to churn this awesomeness, right? Through his different companies, right? And of course, he has had failures. Everyone has them, but the consistency in how, through the lens of AI adjacent and first principles, in a way as a framework, we're going to be able to see that. So, artists, take us through these outputs and awesome AI adjacent engineering wins.
Yeah, so I do have to say I'm a fanboy in terms of I'm a big fan of Elon in terms of what he's done. I think he's done most for our society and for modern society today that anybody has in terms of advancements and the rapid advancements over the last 10 years. Look where we are in terms of kind of space exploration and how far we've come around that. Look where we are in terms of kind of electrification and robotics and so all of these different, and Neuralink, we talked earlier on around it. So all of these advancements that are happening are accelerating, and the guy, like, I don't think there would have been anybody else, like the relentless kind of need for advancements and not giving a shit about what other people think. Like, that is the main thing of why I feel very
Respecting him.
Fortunate to be in respect. Yeah, exactly. Very fortunate to kind of live in a time when we had people like that are pushing, things forward, and it's not about, amplifying value and so on and so forth. So we're very, very lucky, but I want to make sure that that's kind of my position here. And of course, I don't care much about the other stuff. I care about the science, the engineering, and the kind of advancement.
And that's why artist has an Elon Musk tattoo on his left arm, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the element, the E, it's like, it's very,
Oh, there you go. So is your subconscious connecting the brand?
Subconscious. That's right. That's right. That's right. So one thing that we're going to talk about is the framework. You love frameworks, and we're going to talk about the three different kind of breakthroughs and kind of how they relate and kind of what they mean for us as a society and as we're moving forward. Because of course, everybody says AI is going to make a big difference in our lives, but there's a lot of things around AI, and there's a lot of things that are unlocked around computing and computing engine and all of these things. So when we think about, we're going to touch base on those three different companies or three different breakthroughs, but we're also going to look at it from kind of a first principles of framework thinking. And as a framework guy, the first principles, really focuses on this kind of five things, focuses on breaking down problems to the most fundamental elements, right? Like if you think about analogical thinking, usually solutions are derived by comparing with existing models. But whereas first principles really questions every assumption and rebuilds the solution from the ground up. So if you were in higher education, like we all always kid about, or wherever we work, it's like, oh, this is the way we've done it before, right? So it's kind of the antithesis of this is the way we've always done it before. So it's the idea that, the only limiting factors are physics itself, right? There's no limiting factors. Everything else kind of lives in a gray area, meaning, of course we're in society, but lives in a gray area in terms of, why is it this way? Why is it this way? Why does he have to work this way? Can he work another way? And the only limiting factors as humans now have kind of physics. So there's 5 steps to this. Identifying the core problem, breaking it down into fundamental elements, questioning assumptions to discover better alternatives, rebuilding solutions from the ground up without constraints of conventional thinking, meaning that don't just add something because it was done that way. And then the last one, which is probably the most important one, is the testing and iterating rapidly. So the testing, iterating rapidly is super important. One example of this is how Elon approached rockets. So when he founded SpaceX, he found that purchasing a rocket would cost about $65 million, right? And instead of saying, okay, this is acceptable, he deconstructed the problem. So, like, what are the fundamental raw materials needed to build this rocket? And after the research and doing all the work and researching it, he discovered that the materials themselves, like aluminum, copper, carbon fiber, they really accounted for only 2 to 3% of the rocket cost, which is incredible, right? Think about it that way. And the rest of it was either labor, was permitting, was bureaucracy, was project management, all of these different things that, as engineers, we're like, okay, it's the management part. So now, by vertically integrating that production, meaning that he can put this thing together and design reusable rockets also, he can dramatically reduce the expenses, right? Which, of course, we know that led to Falcon 9 success, and kind of which was the first reusable rocket, because when NASA built their rockets, it was just one and done, and that was it. It never went back into space. And then the first principles approach, it didn't just cut the cost, but it also made this rapid iteration possible. So they could launch 2, 3, 4. I forget how many they launched before there was a success. I think they were in the fourth one or the fifth one within a very short period of time, where it would take NASA many, many, many years. So that's the example of that first principles thinking and how it is applied to space, or even something like one of our most trusted kind of government organizations, or NASA, right? Everybody loves NASA. So, but it was applied to aerospace.
And a first principle framework, or I would like to call it a logic model, it's a really important skill. Let me highlight the word skill to have. Think about a core problem. In this case, artists, you're talking about space travel and rockets, right? Enrolling a student, having a breakthrough in a campaign, reducing churn, retention rates in students, all those type of things. They're core problems. And the idea that we are talking about here is that how do we look at this problem differently? Because using heuristics, intuition, or our gut, the first thing that we're going to be doing is taking a shortcut, which is a very human thing to do. What does that mean? I will replicate what has been done before. Everybody, look at our admissions enrollment processes. They look like the ones from 20 years ago with more technology, kind of, sort of.
Exactly.
And what we see through this example is that if the problem is that I need a student in the class paying tuition so that I can do research, right? All of a sudden, like, wait, what are the components? It's not only the admission process or the events, it's the student and the faculty. And at the end, you start looking at this decomposition of the core problem, so that with the iteration and the kind of arrangements of it, you may address that in a more efficient, most cost-effective way. And to your point, NASA has been basically, with incredible engineering and science, in a way, replicating the approach to solve the problems, and never thought about reusable rockets. And what we saw this week through the application of first principles is that a rocket landed on planet Earth. And it was basically, when I saw that, like, wait a minute, that's just basically the rocket taking off, but they're reversing the footage. It literally looks like that. And artists, what that means is that the core problem is I send someone to space, and when they need to come back, I'm going to basically parachute them on the sea. Wait, the components are rockets, human, blah, blah, blah. Also, like, what I need to do is, how do I land this ship back on this station so I can reuse it? And also, like, the whole paradigm changes. And again, if you haven't seen the footage, we recommend you see it. Legit. It's like reversing, playing backwards, the takeoff of a rocket. It was that impressive and in a way flawless.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about that, because that's kind of what inspired me to actually do an episode around this, because it's something that's never been done before. It is way beyond engineering and what was thought possible. And one thing I want to highlight, JC, is and this is maybe an analogy that we talk about this first principles thinking, is this notion that we create a lot of systems in place and policies and things like that. And if you take those rules and if you take them by themselves, they seem very logical, right? They seem very logical, and they seem like, well, it's, you can kind of do it one way or another, but it doesn't seem very harmful. Now, when you put a lot of those things together, they really become prohibiting to moving fast and iterating, and kind of having this velocity, both in companies, in how we build products, but also in how we build organizations. The analogy that's used quite a bit, it's this Gulliver and the string analogy, right? I don't know if you know that one, but it's this essentially kind of excessive, we're talking about this comparison to, Gulliver's Travels, right? Like the protagonist, like Gulliver, he's a giant in the land of Lilliput and is basically immobilized by this tiny strings, each insignificant on its own, right? This little people are throwing tiny strings at him, but they have hundreds and thousands of them. And essentially, he can't move because he's now tied down. One string in itself doesn't do very much harm, but if you have thousands of these different strings, now you become immobile and you can't advance. So it's the same thing that we can use in our systems thinking, and how rules and things that we put in place have an inverse effect to how we can do things better. They have a slowdown effect, right? They have a reverse effect. So any policy that you put in place, or any rule that you put in place, it can be very difficult to unwind unless you have a bigger picture in mind and you start redoing those. So enough about the first principles. Let's jump into the actual three parts. So SpaceX, Starship, huge ambitious test flight, October 13, 2024, which was just this past Sunday. So SpaceX launched the fifth Starship test flight from Texas. So it showcased the world's largest and most powerful rocket, capable of, the word is generating 17 million pounds of thrust and liftoff, meaning this was twice the amount of thrust that was needed for Saturn V rocket that took the astronauts to the moon. So this thing was twice as powerful as, that rocket that took the astronauts to the moon. It's like, for the first time ever, like, it had this super heavy booster with, which is like, it had 33 engines kind of attached to it, which is massive, right? It kind of attempted a return to this launch pad. So think about a 40-story, and not, of course, not think about it, but it's the equivalent of a 40-story high building, and the mass of that building as well, launching into space, and then 23 stories of that building come down and they're caught by two arms, right? And the reason for that was, well, guess what? Why do we need legs? Legs are going to add a lot of weight. Why can't we just catch this thing in midair with its massive arms? Let's catch a 23-story building in midair. So that is incredible, right? And it's the first time that this thing has ever been done. And it kind of pushes forward that vision that the only way that we can kind of be interplanetary, we need this advancements, we need this reusability of this large, massive kind of rockets and a Starship to actually take us into space. Like, we need to escape our own gravity, and we need this massive amount of propulsion to do that. I mean, you're an engineer by trade, so it's like, of course you worked on tiny chips, but think about the breakthrough here.
And this is where the marvel of the engineering, the human, the process, it's worth an episode, right? In our time and all our listeners' time, right? What is happening here, right, is I painted this picture as a very simple thing. You saw the rocket and it feels that it's basically being reversed. It just looks like the takeoff. But the composition of the problem allows you to say these legs, they just basically are dumb, silly, whatever word you want to use. They're not scalable. So think about catching the rocket mid-air. I mean, that's just a fascinating idea. And this is where basically I would actually take a parallel to Innovation's Dilemma and other frameworks, that basically that genius And risk taking is what creates these leaps, whether it's for interplanetary travel or whatever, to basically be attainable. Because artists, I'm an engineer, and thinking out of the box is not easy. It is much easier to think inside the box, which means I don't need the legs. Fine, I can do that. But let me then put smaller, lighter, all the type of legs, catching it midair. That's just out of the box. And my applause to all the engineers and the humans behind this process. We're catching rockets midair. What's our second output? You mentioned Tesla already. So what's happening in Tesla that you want to talk about?
So the interplanetary vision of us going to Mars, that's a longer term vision. I'm not sure exactly what's going to be able to happen, but at some point, we need to, like, who knows what kind of natural catastrophe can happen to our world. Maybe it can be in 100 years, 200, 1,000 years, and so on and so forth. So what that can happen then is, like, we need to be interplanetary. However, and that's what Elon is working towards, sending people to Mars and so on and so forth. But another mission of that is, we here on Earth, as we move forward, we're going to need a lot of just human care. We need a lot of physical things to move us around, to do things for us. So robotics is a huge area where AI and kind of the physical world meet up. And the first thing around robotics is that Tesla, the way that Elon, likes to describe it, is a robotics company. So they're not, a car is just a robotics, system on wheels, whereas a humanoid robot can mimic a human, but there's all kinds of robots, and these robotic systems, that's what Tesla does. So it's the software and the hardware combination of AI simulating the world and learning about the world, so we can then act on that world. So I'm taking it from the other side, right? Because we as humans, as we kind of progress and we move forward, we're going to need more and more, physical capabilities to kind of come along. So on October 10th, which is just a few days before this, Tesla unveiled its Robotaxi prototype, which means that it was this event, We Robot, which mimicked the iRobot. So if you look at some of the examples that they had, so essentially this was at the Warner Brothers Studios. And the Robotaxi also, I think they called it Cybercab. It was designed without a steering wheel. So going back to that first principles, right? And there's a whole episode in a couple other podcasts that I listened to around how Elon came to his engineers and said, we're going to do a car and we're not going to have a steering wheel. So thinking about not the way we've done it before, now that's incredible, right? So it's the first car without, and of course it's going to take a couple of years for it to be produced. But essentially, it's similar to a Waymo, self-driving. There's no steering wheel, and it's going to be mass produced as kind of one unified system. As part of that, also there was the Tesla bots or Optimus. They were also being developed to kind of perform this repetitive tasks, and starting in, like, they're going to be available in factories and other potential areas. So Tesla Optimus robots are also being developed, and they were part of that event as well. While Cybercab was announced, there was also the like a cyber bus, which held a lot more people. But that was the event that got announced, and this idea of us not having to need a car anymore, but everything becomes on demand. And you can hail a cab or you can hail a car whenever, or if you buy it, the car can be going around and taking people from place to place. And when you need it, it comes back to you. And there's kind of cost sharing and so on and so forth. So imagine what can happen in a world where you have to go somewhere, you bring your car with you, and you have a parking lot that's attached to every single building that you go to. Now, you don't need those cars to stay in those buildings because they can go somewhere else, off-site or whatever. Now, imagine all the parking garages are gone. You live in New York City. So this future where autonomous vehicles can be part of our world sounds like science fiction, but it can be here within the next 3 to 5 years.
Right. No doubt that there is
I left you speechless. You haven't spoken one bit.
there's a lot of things that happen in my brain. There's actually a lot there, right? So number one is clearly there is a nice depiction of the first principle framework we've been using today, which is I'm going to look at this problem differently. Why? Because let me now bring a second framework. There's an aspect of continuous incremental innovation in the EV sector, right? Electrical vehicles. In a way, they've been trying to solve autonomous driving with the core problem as still we see it today. I need one car that could drive maybe 4 passengers. There's a steering wheel. When something happens, the passenger can jump in. And I'm now kind of describing the Google Waymo type of project. And it's been successful. It's providing autonomous driving, but it hasn't changed the mobility problem that we see as a society. Fast forward to this announcement of the buses, whether it's New York City or wherever you're at. This introduces autonomous driving, benefits from electrical vehicles, EVs, but it's basically decompose the problem of mobility and look at the components very differently. And here we are. Number two, what I find really interesting as we have this conversation, right, is there's an aspect of training, and this is very parallel to our AI core kind of identity in this podcast, everybody. There is an aspect of doing this with the guardrails and the protection that many of us need to be safe. So what I mean with that, artist, and this is a slight parallel, so feel free to tell me, JC, this is a different podcast. We can have it another time. Think about Waymo, one of the rivals of these technologies that Elon Musk and Tesla have released. They have been doing prototypes for years in San Francisco Central, right? The amount of data points that they have are ridiculous relative to Tesla's driving around the country with the amount of permutations of errors they have seen. It's basically now a larger footprint, national or also international, versus a highly reduced footprint in San Francisco. So what does that mean? Waymo has probably seen, by the way, it's Waymo. I now forgot how to pronounce it. Waymo?
Waymo. Way as in way. Yeah.
Waymo. So Waymo has seen probably every permutation of an accident of an issue in career mobility as we see it today. Hence, the replicability of the problem as we know it. What I see in this Tesla deployment, a bit more loose, if you will, on training data, national footprint, permutations of problems, maybe it hasn't seen all the errors. Elon is famously quoted as some people need to die in order for this to be successful, which is a highly controversial statement. But implicitly what I see here is that there's a new way of driving. There's a new way of not driving. It's a new way of mobility. And those data points do not even exist. So this loose system, if you will, of training data sets holds. And I find that to be very interesting. And the marvel that I have, I applaud the engineering here, not only because, it's able to do autonomous driving, that is reconfiguring the problem as we know it and understanding that training against data that you see today, in a way, it's a replicability of the problem absent of the first principle approach. Does that make sense? How sometimes training data could replicate it, and we can go into the whole training bias aspect, but it's a really interesting thing. If you broke out the problem using a different framework, you need different training data sets.
I'm going to take it back to first principles because there's two things that are happening in here. And you're looking at this as Waymo, which is a car company, autonomous car company, whereas Tesla being a robotics company. So very, very different. So cars are just robots on wheels, and they need to understand the world and they need to react to that world. And at the core of it is very powerful AI systems. And what Tesla has built is one of the most powerful supercomputers to actually, which is called the Doja supercomputer, which powers the Tesla's neural network. And it's actually training to improve their full self-driving capabilities, right? So Karpathy, he was the one working on that at Tesla before, and it was built. So this idea that, a car is just a robot on wheels, now you can take that same, like, for example, if you want to mimic humans, all we have is I forget what the stereoscopic vision. So we see the world, but essentially we have images coming in, we have sensors coming in, but it's a 2D world that we see, but everything else gets constructed in our brains. Our brains actually make up most of the world that we see. So the input is very limited, but our brains make that up. So now we can put the same thing and say, well, Waymo uses LiDAR. Humans don't have LiDAR. We don't measure every single second, like how far we are from different objects and things like that. All we have is our vision. Well, the cars and Tesla has taken a different approach to that because they're approaching it from a first principles, meaning that, you know what, you're not going to strap a LiDAR to a robot. You're not going to strap a LiDAR to, different systems. So if you think about this being a robotics company, those robots are going to be in different ways. And the thing that we have today and models and how we train them is through vision. Vision is one of the most kind of developed ways that we train systems and we train AI today. So the same model that can run Tesla car can also run Optimus, their robots. So now you're using this infrastructure to essentially build, different versions, and you don't have the training data becomes really important and key, but you're feeding in different types of environments, whereas Waymo only has road type environments, whereas Tesla can put in hiking trails and can put in, all kinds of different, world data that us humans can reach and can kind of see, can put in kitchen data, household, environments, and so on and so forth. So he has a much bigger data set to train and to think about and to reason about in order to build this model. So I believe it goes back to those fundamentals, platform first system building and thinking about the reusability for the long run rather than, we solved this vertical thing, which is self-driving cars, which is great, but that's it.
Look, I get your point, and this is where sometimes in this podcast, we disagree, and this makes the conversation even more interesting, right?
Yeah.
I do believe that Elon is magician and a genius, and that genius also manifests itself into a strategic intent and good old branding and marketing. I do not believe that Tesla is a robotics company. When I see their product and what they do, looks like four wheels and it drives and moves people around. That makes you a car company. What do you deploy?
How about Optimus? The robot.
Sure. I mean, then it sounds like Tesla may pivot to something else. But right today, when I say...
No, they're building both of those systems together.
Right. But today, let's slow it down, right? When I look at the Waymo output, totally, right? It's a car, and they basically instrumented this car, whether it was with LiDAR or what kind of these Frankensteins, because they do not look pretty, right? They actually instrumented current cars with wheels and everything, and they basically are providing autonomous driving. When I look at the Tesla approach and I say, who are they? They are an EV company, and they may be pivoting into other aspects. I get you that, right? But there's a ton of these things that I see on the man, Elon Musk. For example, how he thinks of his approach to X as public speaking and whatnot. And I know this takes in different directions, but when I see a consistent aspect of this is who he wants to be, and maybe that's his genius. He's 50 years ahead of me, and this is who he is today as I perceive it, right? And today, Tesla feels very much as probably the most incredible car manufacturers in that label has a connotation. So being a robotics company is fascinating. Probably Tesla may move there, but as of today, I don't touch it or feel it or perceive it that way, Artis. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's very fair because as I don't have a Tesla personally, so it's
I'm so disappointed.
My last gas guzzler. I wanted a gas guzzler, and I've been wanting this car for a while, and then I finally...
No EVs at home, right? For you?
I still don't have an EV. Yeah. No EVs. No. Lots of reasons, but it's just, me. Anyways, I get lazy.
We know there's an EV in your stars, my friend, or a version of autonomous driving in your stars. We know that's not me.
Right. That's exactly what I'm waiting for. So let's move on. So we talked about kind of we've gone from interplanetary, like all that mission, kind of
You
how do
took me to
we,
Mars. You take me to ground Earth for a new aspect of mobility. So
well,
where are we staying? Are we staying on Earth or are we going out of space?
mobility and robotics, right? So how do we change the physical world? Like how do we make sure that we can manipulate the physical world without us doing it? How do we go to space, right? How do we take ourselves out? And then we're going to need a lot of help. Like humans can't do all this stuff, so that's why robots come into play. And then how do we build intelligence into all of these different systems, and how do we do that in order for them to get super smart so they can solve a lot more problems than us? And that's the promise of AI, right? Like that's the promise of this AI systems. And the third component here is the third part that we're going to talk about is XAI, which they build specifically an accomplishment here that they built the fastest supercomputer in 19 days. Elon Musk, they partner with NVIDIA and Oracle to build the world's fastest supercomputer in just 19 days. The system surpasses kind of any state of the art kind of supercomputer in performance and efficiency. It has 100,000 H100s NVIDIA chips, and they put this thing together in 19 days. They delivered the chips, and in 19 days, they powered it, they energized it, they did all the wiring. I forget how many miles of wiring they had to do. Unthinkable that they could do this before. Traditionally, this takes 2-3 years to plan, and then the equipment gets delivered another year or year and a half to actually wire and put this thing together. So 3 to 4 years to put this stuff together, maybe a little bit shorter. 19 days, unthinkable.
Two things.
What do you say?
Well, first of all, we're going to rename today's episode or today's podcast. It's actually not Generation AI, but it's called the Star Trek Podcast. All right. So we're going to take you to the future, everybody.
Star Trek. I like it.
Number two, what you're talking about, it's a really core component of attaining the future, right? The infrastructure, the machinery, aka the computational power needed to achieve this future, where there is autonomous mobility, where there is interspace travel, sometimes requires, the engine to be super powerful. So I always love how at the very core, we can say these incredible things need to be built, and then we can come and bring it back to how does it get done. So, and sometimes it's messy, and seeing miles of cables ain't pretty. There's going to be aesthetically pleasing as a beautiful EV autonomous driving car, or I don't know, the things that we're producing with watches and things of that sort. So these computers are gigantic engineering productions, and they don't look pretty. Also brings me back to my semiconductors years. I remember routing cables, and one of the biggest problems that we had was when you have this structural testing that is super fast, is that it generates a ton of heat. So for every cable, there was a cooling system. So need to go now deep into how the supercomputer was built at XAI to really understand how they cool it, because wires and chips, and I know NVIDIA is really good at this, they just tend to be little ovens. And my gosh, this made me think of, this is going to be a hot, gigantic computer. This XAI supercomputer, how does it look like? Is it just probably racks of like a data center?
Yes, exactly. Just a lot of racks. And you can probably go on X and take a look at some of the images there.
I'm looking at it right now. It looks nice and clean.
Yes, it does look nice and clean. So one thing is that it's not an oven. It is water cooled.
Sure, that's how you cool it. Yeah,
it's one of his first. Well, I mean, a lot of data centers are not water cooled, right? But the water cooling removes a lot of fans and the loudness and all those things, and it makes things a lot more efficient. So it allows for smaller components to be packed in even tighter, because the heat gets dissipated a lot faster through water rather than air. Whereas if you have air, you need spaces and gaps and things like that for air to get in between. Whereas with water, it's a lot faster. Obviously, as an engineer, you know that, but So it allows for minimization of components and putting things together a lot tighter.
Fascinating. 19 days, artist. How is this possible in 19 days?
19 days.
I mean, just
I don't know how many people worked on this and physically and did it. I don't think this guy slept. It's incredible, right? You were just watching it for the first time now, aren't you? You didn't know about this.
I'm sorry, my friend. I've been tracking Microsoft 3 Mile Island, and you hit me with a supercomputer that gets built in 19 days, whereas this one you actually have to buy it because they couldn't build it in.
You mean you have to buy the data
Yeah,
sources? Yeah.
you couldn't build it in 3 years, type of thing. Right? So it's fascinating. Look, at the end of the day, this is where my maybe I went on a rant. Maybe this gets edited. Who knows? But these achievements required also scalability on how the sausage is made, and it requires a new supercomputer to continue to achieve those things. And what do you know about the applications of this supercomputer? What are they intending to do? Because this is brand new. It didn't power the SpaceX achievements.
Grok 2.
It's all going to be an XAI. There's no cross.
Yeah, the XAI. At least not right now, but there will be, like, this is moving towards kind of the vision of the intent is to develop artificial general intelligence, or AGI, the same mission that Google is kind of moving towards, or Anthropic or OpenAI. But obviously this is, the way that this is getting done is a lot faster. And when you think about it, the speed and the precision, if we go back to kind of take those leadership kind of principles in here, right? So we go to the first one, and we talk about SpaceX, fail fast and iterate quickly. So embracing failure and learning rapidly, first principles thinking, reimagining the rockets. Like that's really, really important. On the second one, it's like bold vision for autonomy. Like it really drove this iteration around the mindset that you have to remove the wheel, and it has to be full self-driving and no LiDAR. So this idea of the value of autonomous fleet is gigantic, right? It can transform cities, it can transform habitats and how these things work. And again, it's a bolder vision, and it's something that it takes years and years and years in order to accomplish. And when you go to the third one with XAI, we talk about speed and precision, the ability. There's nobody out there that can actually do this. It's like like Elon is. I don't know. It's like he did it, but it's there's no one else. So how do you get the permitting? How do you get all these things in place in order to get this done? And then again, focusing on those first principles, right? Reimagining the AI infrastructure from scratch. Literally, it's like, he didn't have to go partner with Oracle or Microsoft or whatever and give it billions of dollars and go through their data centers. He's like, screw this. I'm going to build it ourselves, and then we're going to do it really fast so we can catch up. And so that's the whole mentality here. That's really, really interesting. So,
but remember during the Tesla boom, the EVs as we know them, that was probably one of the biggest stories of success during COVID, because as supply chain collapses around the world, right? All of a sudden, I cannot get my engines, my tires, all the components are going to the car. And what I remember hearing is that Tesla had its verticalization so deep that they basically were making everything, manufacturing everything. So the dependency on supply chain is minimal. Therefore, they're able to comply with all these orders, and they have a gigantic boom. What you're seeing through first principles is that goes over and over and over. And that point just really, really brought it home to me, that OpenAI may have a supercomputer as powerful. I don't know how does it compare, whether it's more powerful or less powerful, but your point is very well taken, that the partnership via Microsoft, kind of going outside your organizational boundaries and created that capability through a partnership, is not the same as saying, I'm going to build it, I'm going to own it, it's going to be mine in my terms. That's a really interesting design principle and strategic intent, and it comes directly influenced by this idea of first principles. I totally get it now, and I was failing to connect the dots there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, if you want to think about like what they have in common, empower engineers to question assumptions, or empower people, the actual people who are building this stuff and designing it for efficiency,
Go
right?
engineers.
It's like at the end of the day, these are engineering. Go engineers. As an engineer, I'm like,
Yes.
yes, remove or operate with minimal bureaucracy so you can favor kind of this rapid decision making. We hate bureaucracy. Like that's part of the reason why I'm not actually working on an institution, today was it's like just things move very slowly. We're trying to change the industry from the outside,
Why?
but
You didn't like working for a provost, a dean, an academic chair, and a director in between? You didn't like that?
decisions are decades long. It's like, remember. Anyway, so you also need to have somebody who's going to be relentless, right? It's like, you have to build the ecosystem. Thinking about systems, the systems thinking is very important. You can't build something in isolation. You have to think how the systems fit together, like how they are going to kind of affect the future and so on and so forth. And really, like, that's the master class if you think about that, in having that vision. And of course you're iterating very quickly, so it seems like it's a master plan, to be honest, JC. But I read this book once called Emergence: The Connected Lives of Ants, Brains, Cities, and Software, right? The book is by Steven Johnson. I believe he's at Google right now. But anyways, so this whole idea is that everything has very simple rules. And when you put these rules together over time, these systems can become very complex. So when you come in as an alien, for example, were to land here on Earth today, and if they look at our roads, it would be very strange to them, because they can fly, right? They don't need roads. And it's like they look at this maze of roads and they're like, holy shit, like what the hell are these guys doing? Emergence is kind of this notion that slowly systems can build, but they're very simple rules. And you kind of test and iterate. And it's very similar here. And I'm trying to pull an analogy where things kind of get built, but if you're going in the right direction, or if you're making decisions and you're iterating quickly and like adjusting, then you can get to a destination a lot faster than having a master plan. And master plans never work and never kind of get you there. But this idea of moving and kind of readjusting and moving faster, and speed is the name of the game. I guess that's what I'm trying to get to. And speed is only possible if you are kind of breaking things down and readjusting and kind of testing and moving things faster.
I have two questions for you. As I think we may be wrapping up and kind of thinking about how these patterns associate, right? But what I'm hearing from you, right, is look, this is a framework that has allowed incredible technological developments, right? And there's an aspect of, it has to be done by engineers, so empower them. Bureaucracy could kill it, so minimal. And timelines need to be audacious and somewhat crazy, and speed. So it's basically the label that I think you use there. Let me ask you a question. Let me make a sandwich of a question, and feel free to react however you want. Incredible achievements, Elon Musk. Love your framework. Thank you for bringing this to us, Mother Earth. There's 1,000 other things that I disagree with you, Elon Musk, and I don't know how you feel about that. So how do you react to, how do you leave me and everyone else who says, yeah, I admire that, but X, Y, Z, like blank, 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 all the things that, I can call and say I disagree with, right? What happens with the yin yang, the good and the bad of these geniuses, humans, Elon Musk's? The second question kind of embedded there. It's a recipe for chaos, speed, no oversight, and just basically removing the boundaries of technical people. It seems that it could work. Elon has demonstrated it has worked, but in other places it's just a disaster. Like, is there a fourth ingredient? Like, what happens there? But speed, sometimes it creates errors. And you were in the software industry. You've basically been doing this for quite some time. You know that sometimes when we go fast without oversight, like, what the hell got built? You have to go back and do it. So how do you bring all these things together, the yin and the yang, and this idea of a really different configuration that sometimes doesn't end up in these awesome stories?
Look, at the end of the day, the way I think about this, or at least, nobody is good or bad or,
Hmm.
intrinsically, right? So there's just actions that you do, and then those actions can
Some
be,
of them suck.
oh no, I mean, they can be good for somebody or they're seen differently for different people. Now, when you take the impact and you think about the impact that we're doing on the world, it's a very personal kind of drive as well. A lot of us think that in order to make impact, we need a lot of power, and in order to gain that power, we either need to be in politics or we need to have a lot of resources and money in order to make that impact. So if it comes down to impact, then you feel really good about the impact that you're making. My impact is around, building great technology for higher education, for engaging students, because I see problems there. And my impact is also towards my family and how I think about, raising my kids to be great citizens. And that's the impact that I want to make in the world right now. Now, other people have different ways of thinking about that impact. So as long as people, move things forward and make a bigger impact, the other stuff around it doesn't really matter. It matters in the point in time in the history. But when you look at the history books, the impact is the actions that they've taken towards those particular goals, right? So can you think about Elon and taking certain political stands? I don't know, JC, because in 5 years, then the present becomes history. So we don't know how things will play out in the future. So looking at somebody's impact today, I'm trying to celebrate the good things that move society forward. And that's the way I think about it. Like, I'm not worried about, the power struggles on how people feel about. There's always going to be kind of this notion of us fitting in and pecking order and all that. And when you expand that to neighborhoods and families and expand it to cities and expand it to countries and so on and so forth, like the idea of power is always going to be there, and people go about different ways of getting that power and how that works. But it's very rare where people are unselfishly motivated and move things forward because they feel that there is a bigger, accomplishment to be done here. And I truly believe that in this case, that's the case. Like, that's, he's one of the people who's doing that. Of course, technology has allowed, single people or like individuals to accelerate this even further, or to make a bigger impact. Whereas before, you really had to be, of course, an inventor, but also, and then those inventions, like, you weren't considered impactful until after you died, because those inventions weren't really that popular or made an impact in society until, dozens of years or hundreds of years later, right? So think about Nikola Tesla, right? He's like one of the greatest inventors, but he died poor and so on and so forth. So all of these things are, at the end of the day, moving things towards society. That's the way I think about it.
Interesting. The part no, that's fascinating, and one of the interesting things that artist is mentioning is that the quest for impact, in a way, justifies these radical thinking or very different thinking, and then the output probably outweighs the process and how it gets done. The part that I just want to leave us with is I see what you're saying, and there's a lot of examples in my head. Picasso, Oppenheim, even Einstein, right? Artists, scientists, really incredible thinkers who have basically achieved that. And then when we decompose their lives and we look at this documentary and pictures and things, like there were this kind of like dark yin and yangs, to use the analogy I used before.
We care about the drama, like
Sure,
the
sure.
human aspect of it. It's like, I feel like you got to separate that from the impact. Like, it's different.
It's just that this is the first time I think I get to leave these Picassos, Oppenheims, and geniuses of the world, and I'm leaving it. So I get to see this real time as opposed to in documentary form, right? So it's a really interesting thing, right? Elon Musk, a genius. It's just that out of, as you mentioned, out of his actions, there's so many things that I find to be just basically so different to how I process or go about my life. But at the end of the day, and this is what his biography in a way captures, in his biographer say, right? Sometimes these geniuses will break things in the process. And in a way, the innovator's journey, it's messy, and history will come and tell us. Not artists and JC today, but in 20 years, 50 years from now, it's like, was it worth it? Was it, this chaos on this and XYZ? Was it worth it? And this is a really interesting conversation because we are seeing it live and it's fascinating to experience. So here's to the innovators, their road. You're being one of them, my friend, sometimes being messy. And for the future,
Small impact.
It doesn't matter, right? Impact is also relative to the context that you live in. But anyway, for
Correct.
the journey, for the history and the future that you built, right? My father used to say, tomorrow, the future is built today. And that, in a way, that's what you're doing. And Elon Musk's of the world are doing. So with that, is that a good quote then? In a way, positive?
I think quoting your dad is always a good place to end it. That's great.
All right, my friend.
All right, everybody. This was a little bit of a longer one. Yes, this was great. Thank you, JC. To everybody else, please rate us and like this episode and follow us so you can get more of this as soon as they drop. We appreciate you and till next time.
Always quote your dad.
Generation AI is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you're going to like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing weekly, and we've got a wide range of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed leaders and professionals like you find their next big idea. They feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts, like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Jenny Lee Fowler, Brian Gross, and many of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform that's helping institutions all over the country create meaningful, personalized, and engaging connections with their prospects and students. Learn more at element451.com.